If we can tell the story of how it all began, and these people who actually, were there at the beginning and what they stood for and how things shifted, then that's something that is important for our film, but also important historically, because they don't have a voice. They didn't have a voice.
Right around the period when the revolution started, my sister Zainab tweeted, "The people are waking up. They're starting to say enough is enough. We're not going to allow these governments to walk all over us anymore."
I take it very personally, and when I see something happen that I feel is so unjust, it makes me very angry, and I did feel like someone needs to stand up.
Hi, I'm Raihan Salam. This week, Vice meets Greg Barker, the director of We Are the Giant. Greg, thanks very much for joining us.
Great to be here.
So Greg, you have made a movie about an incredibly sprawling, multinational phenomenon, the Arab Spring, as it unfolded in 2011, and in some ways is still unfolding. What is it that led you to want to make a movie about the Arab Spring?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, because, I'm not Arab, obviously, I don't live there, but I've spent a fair amount of time in the Middle East. The beginning of it really dates back to when I first moved to Europe as a grad student, which was in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell. I was just kind of caught up in that revolutionary moment, and it was an extraordinary thing to witness. And I could just feel as the Arab Spring developed, and I had been in Egypt a lot the previous year, in 2009 and 2010 on other projects. And a lot of people were saying something's going to, the dam is going to burst here. We don't know when, something's going to happen. And so it was interesting to see how it happened so quickly and spread so quickly to other countries. And it's almost, I think historically one can see that revolutions often happen in waves, So I just felt like we were witnessing a wave of revolutions and that we've seen across time and cultures throughout history. And this time it was happening in the Middle East. And I thought, that's really interesting, and let's see if there's a way of kind of capturing not just what's going on, but kind of the motivations and the journey that somebody who becomes a revolutionary embarks upon.
So this sounds like a very big undertaking. You're trying to get at these larger universal themes, and yet to make the movie feel coherent, you found these characters. And I wonder, what was that process like, the process of identifying the people who would allow you to tell your story?
Yeah, I mean, in feature documentaries, it's all about characters, because there's no narration, it's all sort of narrative storytelling. So, we got to find people who both have, compelling stories and also, work on camera. And so really it was just casting a very wide net with me and my co-producer, a young Arab-American filmmaker named Razan Gaini, who I'd worked with previously on a film called Quran by Heart for HBO. Initially came across this story in Libya, about a Libyan-American family, and then the story in Bahrain about this extraordinary family and these two sisters, Miriam and Zainab al-Khawaja. And I heard about them, and Razan went to meet them. Well, she snuck into Bahrain as a tourist, because I had been to Bahrain previously. And then we knew that, and so the regime knew who I was, so I couldn't go back officially. And then Syria kind of took a long time to identify the characters. That took probably about another year until we found the right people to profile. And then telling their story was a massive challenge for our entire team, and particularly Razan's spearheaded that. That was very difficult.
There is something interesting about the fact that, when we think of the Arab Spring, okay, so you had this restlessness and eventually this uprising in Tunisia. Then you have, these events in Egypt, which were perhaps the most kind of galvanizing and the most visible internationally, given Egypt's weight and importance. But you start the story in Libya, which is kind of an interesting choice. And then, of course, Bahrain, another place that in some respects is maybe marginal to the heart of the Arab world, a place that's often ignored, a little island. And then Syria, that's very much a story that's still unfolding. That's the kind of So I wonder, how did you make that choice to start with Libya in the film?
Well, I feel like I have to listen to where the film is going, and partly discover that in the edit room. So we cut this film for almost a year, and we had various structures. So, starting with Libya was something that we sort of discovered later on, and it really is almost a thematic choice in that ultimately the film became, I think, kind of an exploration of challenges and sort of choices revolutionaries face. And so that story kind of represents the armed struggle in a classic sense. Somebody who wants to go off and, who makes a decision to go off and become an armed revolutionary to overthrow a bad regime. And so it seemed like it just worked to start with that first. And it's kind of a choice that's just made very organically in the cutting room. And you see that evolve to a different level in Syria, where those characters initially start off, they want to start a nonviolent revolution, uprising.
And then it gets away from them.
And it gets away from them, and with tragic consequences. And then Bahrain carries on that theme as well of nonviolence, and they decide to carry on with nonviolence regardless of what else is going on. So it's almost like at one point when we hit upon that structure, I thought of it as almost like a meditation on the choices a revolutionary might make. And so armed struggle, nonviolence, okay, and then sort of inching towards some element of the armed struggle and what could happen when a regime sort of pushes back, and then, people who just decide to carry on with nonviolence no matter what.
بكي حكى زيدون قال لي متريح السلاح أنا ومانا صراحة عمرنا ما استعملنا سلاح ورمينا بأسلحة اللي قعدت عندنا توه كلها رمينا بين
I could see the revolution started to change from revolution to a war between the young revolutionary and this dictator government.
So let's dive in a little bit with the segment on Libya where you're talking about a father and a son. Muhannad, it seems, is a guy, might have been a little directionless, grew up mainly in Virginia, mainly in the United States, and then finds himself in Libya and then gets swept up. What do we know about Muhannad and his life at that point in time before Libya found itself in the middle of this civil war?
Yeah, I think he's a typical 19-year-old. He's dual national, Libyan American, spent a lot of time in Virginia going to, public schools in Martinsville, small town, would go back and forth to Benghazi, where his family's from.
That must have been pretty challenging in itself for a kid to just not necessarily feel, so rooted in one place where you're kind of, going back and forth.
Yeah, but I think it's a pretty common experience now amongst a lot of, Americans who have roots elsewhere. I mean, people go back and forth, and it's kind of it's a little rootless, but also I think it can strengthen someone's identity. You feel like somebody is a citizen of both countries, and I think that's how he felt. He felt very American. He felt very Libyan. He happened to be in Benghazi, and his father and mother were back in Virginia when the revolution began.
And they can't have been thrilled about the fact that he's starting to get drawn in to the protests against the regime.
Well, no, I think they were actually very worried. I mean, they were not Gaddafi supporters. Benghazi was always treated badly by the Gaddafi's regime because it had been the roots of resistance before. If you go there, the city is, speaking politely, not in great shape because it got very little investment over the course of the Gaddafi regime. Yeah. So they were not fans of his. At the same time, they knew what he was capable of. So the father was very upset. I guess he's in his late 40s. I mean, I got along with him great, Osama. And, it happens, and he's like, this is amazing. But as a father, he was just like, I'm worried about my son. So he went over.
One thing I wonder about, since, so much of the movie is about these revolutionary archetypes and the choices that one faces, you wonder, I mean, in some cases, some people who are drawn to revolution might be people who just don't have a ton of direction, kind of find themselves swept up into something, find themselves attached to a larger cause. Is that part of what was going on with Muhannad, do you think?
I think there's often an element of romance in any cause. Yeah, I mean, if you look at people who decide to go off to fight Franco in the Spanish Civil War, there's a romance to it. And particularly amongst young people, particularly amongst young men, It's often why some people join the military in any country, let's go and become a part of something bigger. and let's sort of, find a narrative that adds meaning to their life. So I think that, I think with him, he wasn't sure. He'd sort of thought maybe he'd be a doctor. He wasn't sure. He was 19, and the revolution just starts, and he's in the middle of it, and they're calling him, and he's like, "Don't worry, Mom and Dad, everything's fine." But they could hear in the background, that he was right in the thick of it. And so, as parents, they were worried. And so his father, Osama, gets on a plane from Dulles and goes off to Benghazi to stop his son from basically to save him and take him back to America. And then that's not what happens.
A lot of people in Western country and even United States, they don't appreciate what they have, because they have never kind of lived under this bloody dictatorship. As a father, I wanted them to get the hell out of there. But as a person who lived in Libya, I could see my son was right. And I remember one day coming to me and saying, "Dad, we have people losing their life, and we need ambulance that it is rough terrain that can go pick up the injured." And that's when I joined with him in the front line.
You also have a section in the film on Syria and two gentlemen, Ghassan and Motaz, both of whom, start out as nonviolent and then get kind of caught up in what becomes a violent struggle. And that is perhaps humanitarian crisis #1 in the world right now. Tell us a bit about how you came upon their stories.
Well, that was through my co-producer, Razan Gaini, as I mentioned before, an Arab-American filmmaker, very talented. We'd worked together before. And, I just felt like, okay, as Syria unfolded, I felt like we have to find a way of telling a story from Syria. And eventually she came to me one day and she says, "I think we can tell the story of the people who organized the very first nonviolent protests. And their stories have never been told before." And I was like, "That's incredible. Where are they?" And particularly around this group around Motaz in Daria outside of Damascus. And it's a very dangerous location and really impossible to send somebody in there and expect to get out alive. And so we had to figure out a way of doing it logistically. And that took a long time. But I just felt like that was, okay, if it's becoming this, if the narrative is shifting, it was like, Syria is this bloody civil war. Now with ISIS, it's even worse. Let's look, if we can tell the story of how it all began, and these people who actually, were there at the beginning and what they stood for and how things shifted, then that's something that is important for our film, but also important historically, because they don't have a voice. They didn't have a voice. It's like, this is what I hope that segment in particular can do, is kind of change some of the narrative about it.
إحدى الانتقادات الأساسية هو إصرارنا المتكرر والمستمر لسلمية السماء. المظاهرات عرفت من مظاهرات الورود. نحن خلينا نقول من أول المدن اللي رفعنا الورود بوجه النظام. واللي قلنا أول من قال سلمية سلمية لو قتلوا كل يوم 100.
The final episode in the film seems to have been one particularly dear to your heart, and I also imagine it'll be somewhat more accessible for a lot of your international audience. You tell the story of two sisters in Bahrain, a country that is often ignored, when you're reading the international news, but it turns out to actually be a pretty interesting place. Tell us a bit about it.
Well, Bahrain is a small nation state on the Persian Gulf. Very wealthy. It's a monarchy, as are a lot of the Gulf states, and it's very closely aligned to the Emirates and to Saudi Arabia, and it is home of the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, which is the guarantor of security in the Persian Gulf. So it's a very small base, but extremely important strategically. And so as a result of that, it's a very close U.S. ally. And so when the uprisings began in Egypt, some of the Bahraini activists who had been, agitating for rights of the minority for, a long time, thought, okay, here's the time that we should act and we should call people out on the streets. And that led to, a crackdown. But in the film, we really focus on one family, a family of activists, a father who had been, his name is Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja, who'd been very active against the regime for decades, was in exile, living in London and then in Denmark. He raised his family in Denmark. And he has these two extraordinary daughters who became caught up in the revolution, and almost in a way kind of echoing what happened in Libya, kind of ahead of their father in a way, saying, we got to go out in the streets. And the father was like, this might not be the time, we have to be careful with...
But he was grateful to be back in the country, right?
Yes, and they were
having been exiled for so much of his adult life.
That's right, and then initially they went back hoping that there was going to be some real change in the country, and there were signs that the monarchy was going to try to modernize and change and give more rights to the minority, and so there was some hope for incremental change, and those hopes were often dashed. But there was some dialogue going on, so it wasn't perfect at all. But I think he was more cautious than his daughters, and they went out on the streets, and then the whole family sort of gets caught up in this revolution, and so I really sort of thought it was, once I met the sisters, I met Miriam al-Khawaja, and then we snuck in my co-producer Razan into Bahrain to meet Zainab, and I saw all the footage, and I just thought this family is extraordinary.
Hey,
Good.
nice to see you. Thank you for coming.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Good. Yeah, come on, come back. Good to see you again.
I went out saying, if I can sit with these people who are making these decisions and explain to them the horrific violations that are taking place in Bahrain, they're human beings. How can they not care? Right now, the situation, what it needs the most is international pressure. The Bahraini regime today believes that they have international immunity. They have not been held accountable. It's very problematic when we see the kind of double standards that we see coming from places like the United States today.
So one of the formative experiences for you was having been in Europe in '89 and watching those revolutions turn out very successfully. Do you think that that's a problem a lot of Americans have? They look at this region of the world and they think that, our experience, our revolution, or what happened in Eastern Europe, that's going to apply here.
Yeah, I think most recent revolutions have been relatively peaceful. At least certainly in Eastern Europe, in the Philippines, people power, it's all very sort of romantic, and I think in a way we're kind of lulled into thinking that that's the way things often are, when in fact historically it's usually not that way. It's usually long and often bloody. Tiananmen Square is a case in point. The Iranian Revolution, 1979, was very, very bloody and took a long time for it to sort itself out. And certainly the crackdowns a few years ago in Iran was very violent as well. So it's historically a very mixed bag. If you look at the French Revolution, the answer to the chaos in France was Napoleon, and so it took decades for it to sort itself out.
Greg, you are not offering a very optimistic picture of what might come next, but
no, I think that's right. I think we have to mentally think that it's not that these people, which you often hear, are not ready for a revolution or for democracy. It is that revolutions historically, even our own in America, take a long time to resolve themselves. And along the way, it's often very chaotic.
One of the neat aspects of your film is that you are constantly counterposing what's happening to your characters with historical examples, from Gandhi or Nelson Mandela and others. How aware were these guys of these other examples? And to what extent do they think of themselves as being in dialogue with them?
Yeah, I think it's an awareness that, it seems to me, develops over time. I think it's safe to say none of our characters, as far as I know, no major figures in the Middle East were like professional revolutionaries before. They were activists, they wanted to do things, but they weren't like, Lenin, who'd been thinking about a revolution for decades, and or Mao, These are people who saw a moment and started acting. But what was interesting about several of the characters we profiled in the film is their sense of awareness and their sense of looking to history across time and cultures to kind of find some sort of guidance and some inspiration. And so they did sort of naturally start looking at other examples, and King and Gandhi and Mandela, what works, what doesn't work, you know, and of course regimes do the same thing. Regimes do the same thing. So like, you know, one of the reasons that China cracked down in Tiananmen was because they saw what was happening in Eastern Europe, and they felt Gorbachev was making a huge mistake by allowing, you know, Eastern Europe to go free. Now that sent a powerful message to other regimes that if you crack down hard and snuff out a nonviolent protest in its beginning, your chances of surviving are much higher. And I think Syria's learned that, you know, and that's what they're doing. But it takes this kind of ruthlessness to kind of do whatever it takes. And, you know, Mubarak, you know, didn't have that. I mean, he did not, I mean, people were killed, obviously, and tragically, but they were not mowing down everybody in Tahrir Square at that time. That happened later.
بآمن لحد بسلمية الثورة ولحد الآن بسعى لسلمية الثورة والحفاظ على سلمية الثورة ومو بس أنا أغلب الناشطين هيك. هي بلدنا، إذا النظام ما وثائق بده يمشي يحرق البلد ما يمشي. لأن هي بلدنا، هي بخاف عليها مشان مستقبلنا مشان مستقبل أولادنا. فمشان هيك رح تضل سلمية ولازم نضل سلمية. يا شعب بيدوم سآمن حنن الحرية حان.
So, Greg, you've made a film about the choices that revolutionaries face. Who is your intended audience? Is it other would-be revolutionaries, other people who want to make change in their countries or wherever else? Well,
That would be great, but it's not just for them. I mean, it's really for as wide an audience as possible. It plays incredibly well with young people. I mean, it's a story about young people who are, you know, kind of, as we said before, sort of embarking on a journey that is, in a way, sort of calling them to something higher. And with all the struggles and often tragedies that involves. But I think it's kind of, I'm really ultimately try to shift this narrative that we have in you know, the U.S. right now about what happened in the Middle East during the Arab Spring and how, I mean, you just hear that it was a mistake and it was, you know, better off, and with ISIS, it all seems such a mess, and, you know, yes, and yet I just think it would help to have some humility about all this, and
to humanize the motivations.
And to humanize motivation. These are these people's lives, and to say that they would just be better off sort of not having done this and letting the dictator stay in place is, I think, a form of cultural arrogance. And I say that as a you know, a successful white American, and I just feel like it's that we have to respect that other people might sort of want the same ideals that we say that this country was built on, but that process is not pretty. And it wasn't pretty for us. We've just forgotten about it. You know, this country was a mess after the revolution, you know, and it took a long time to sort itself out. That's historically the norm. So let's give them the time and space to kind of go through that process.
And how would you recommend people find the film?
In the US, it'll be available on video on demand, iTunes, eventually Netflix. So it'll be widely available. It's available internationally as well. It had a theatrical release in Britain. You can get the DVD. It's online. I mean, I think, you know, just Google "We Are the Giant" and look for it, and you'll be able to see it. But our intention is for it to have as wide a release as possible.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Thanks very much. Enjoyed being here.